Shabbat Shalom, Chag Sameach. Every Sukkot when I was growing up, my family would build a sukkah in our backyard. We would decorate it, and then we'd invite family and friends over to eat and enjoy the holiday with us, especially for our annual Sunday afternoon sukkah party. Those gatherings were some of my favorite childhood memories. And one year, when I was just old enough to want to be in charge, and just young enough to be unable to do anything to help, I learned the secret to hosting the sukkah party. I was 6 or 7 years old, and I demanded that my parents give me a job. I wanted to help host the sukkah party. I was too small to carry out trays of food. I was too short to reach the decorations at the top of the sukkah. I still am. But I insisted, there must be something I can do as a host. Finally, my mom crouched down next to me and said, "You're right, we do have a job for you. And actually, this is the most important job of all. This is much more important than the food or the decorations or even the sukkah itself. Your job is to make everyone feel welcome." I beamed with pride. I was given the most important job at the sukkah party, and I took it very seriously. Though I'm sure that my mom had just wanted me to stop asking for a job, there was a lot of truth in what she said that day. Making people feel welcome actually is much more important than the food, the decorations, or any other aspect of a gathering. Making guests feel welcome is what it means to be a host. Abraham and Sarah knew this. Even when all they had was a tent, a tree, and some little bits of flour and milk and curds, when 3 guests appeared out of nowhere, Abraham and Sarah welcomed them. It wasn't about how nice their tent was, or how big their tree was, or how much food they had. It was an attitude, a warmth, a sense of inclusion. And it is significant that our Jewish value of hachnasat orchim, welcoming guests, comes from this biblical story. Not a story about the perfect venue, the perfect food, the perfect music, but a story about a modest gathering with a warm welcome. This is considered the ideal way to welcome guests. There's a midrash that this tent that Abraham and Sarah welcomed their 3 guests into was actually the first sukkah. And so, Sukkot is not only a holiday of harvest or a holiday of impermanence and leaving our comfortable homes, but it's also a holiday of welcoming guests. Dwelling in a temporary structure helps us recall the experience of the Israelites wandering in the desert, feeling vulnerable and unwanted. And so we fill our sukkah with invited, wanted, welcomed guests. In the 13th century, the Kabbalists decided to take the practice of hachnasat orchim on Sukkot even farther. Not only should we open up our sukkah to our friends and family, and not only should we open up our sukkah to the poor and hungry among us, but we also open up our sukkah to our ancestors. We spiritually invite in Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, Jacob and Leah, Joseph and Rachel, Moses and Miriam, Aaron and Deborah, and David and Ruth. They are called ushpizin, the Aramaic word for guests. There are many different traditions about who should be invited each night, especially regarding the women who were added much later. But regardless of who is chosen for each night, the tradition is that every night of Sukkot, we invite a pair of them to dine with us, hoping that we will soak up the lessons of their presence. While there are many lessons we could learn from each one of our biblical ancestors, today we will focus on what they teach us about hachnasat orchim, welcoming guests. There are 7 nights of ushpizin pairs. We'll focus on 4 of them. On the first night, we invite into our sukkah Abraham and Sarah, the original Jews and the original guest welcomers. From Abraham and Sarah, we learn the value of welcoming guests, no matter how important or unimportant they may seem. When the three visitors, who we later learn are angels, arrive, it's not clear at all that Abraham and Sarah knew who they were. Abraham sees three figures in the distance, and he immediately snaps into action. He runs from the entrance of his tent to greet them, bowing to the ground and inviting them in. He brings water to bathe their feet and lets them recline under the shade of the tree. Sarah gets out their best flour, starts kneading, and quickly throws together some cakes. Abraham brings the visitors whatever scraps of food he has. It's no five-star hotel, but it is so genuine and so warm. Only after Abraham and Sarah have gone this far out of their way to make the three visitors feel welcomed do they learn that the visitors are, in fact, angels. When we make a guest list for a gathering, when we prepare for guests' arrival, and when we open our door and greet our visitors, we should have this lesson from Abraham and Sarah in mind. Whether that visitor is the King of England or someone who had nowhere else to go, it is a Jewish value coming straight from Abraham and Sarah to welcome them all the same. On the second night of Sukkot, we invite Isaac and Rebekah to dine with us. Isaac was quiet, willing to trust and go along with others, even willing to go along with his father when he almost sacrificed Isaac instead of an animal. Rebekah, on the other hand, was strong, opinionated, and knew how to take control of a situation. When she wanted to make sure Isaac's blessing would go to Jacob, not Esau, she came up with a plan and didn't hesitate to enact it. From this pair of Ushpizin, Isaac and Rebekah, we learn that as host, sometimes we must step up, and sometimes we must step back. Priya Parker, master facilitator and author of the renowned book, The Art of Gathering, teaches not to be a chill host. She means that we should not just assume that the social dynamics of our gathering will fall into place. We have to consider carefully how to orchestrate the best possible experience for everyone. Maybe that means an icebreaker. Maybe that means ensuring that everyone has a chance to speak without one person taking too much of the spotlight. We have to be willing to assume our position of authority as host, but assume it generously. The other side of the coin is what she calls ungenerous authority, a domineering host who seeks to control people for the host's own sake. We have to strike a balance. Sometimes we have to step up, like Rebekah, and sometimes we have to step back, like Isaac. Jumping to the fourth night, we welcome Rachel and Joseph to our Sukkot. Rachel and Joseph are a mother-son pair, and together they could be described as the favorites. Rachel was Jacob's favorite wife, the woman he wanted to marry originally before he was tricked into marrying Leah first. Jacob never hid that Rachel was his favorite, his most loved, his most special. And Joseph was Rachel's firstborn. Though Jacob already had 10 sons, the moment Joseph was born, he became the favorite. Jacob gifted him a colorful overcoat, causing his already jealous brothers to seethe. Once again, there was no hiding that Joseph was the favorite, the most loved, the most special. From Rachel and Joseph's experience, we learn that the way to make our guests feel most welcomed and wanted in our Sukkot and in our homes is to make them feel favorite, to make each guest feel special. We can do that by establishing a personal and unique connection to each person, by noticing their particular skills or interests, and by spending time genuinely listening to what they have to say. Who wouldn't feel like a welcome guest when the host makes them feel as special as Rachel and Joseph felt? On the fifth night, we welcome into our sukkah Moses and Miriam, the brother-sister duo who led the Israelite people from slavery in Egypt to freedom and redemption. The hope, of course, is that for none of your guests is the world outside of your gathering comparable to slavery in Egypt. But there is a real lesson here. A good gathering can be an oasis in the midst of a busy world. Even though the Israelite people are described in the Torah as stiff-necked and challenging, Moses reassures them time and time again. Miriam leads the people in celebration, bringing song and joy into a perilous journey. As hosts, we can bring people along into the experience we want them to have: redemptive, relaxing, joyful, and a break from the stresses of the surrounding world. This is even more true when the gathering takes place on a holiday like Sukkot or on Shabbat. These holy days are meant to be a break. We are meant to separate their holiness from the mundane rest of the week. From Moses and Miriam, we learn that part of our responsibility as hosts is to lead people from the hectic to the haven of our gathering. We should welcome all guests warmly, regardless of how important we think they are. We should discern when to step up and take control and when to step back and follow. We should make every guest feel special, and we should create a temporary oasis that feels separate from the outside world. This is how we practice Haknasat Orchim, making our guests feel warmly welcomed into our homes, whether we have a sukkah or not. Not just our spiritual ancestor Ushpizin, but our living, breathing guests too. The sukkah reminds us what it feels like not to have a place to go. We respond by filling our sukkah with invited, welcomed, warmly embraced guests. That is how we reverse the feeling of being unwanted and unrooted. That is what Sukkot is about, which is why it's the most important job at a sukkah party and the most important job at any gathering. Sukkot is known in our liturgy as Zman Simchatenu, the time of our rejoicing. So while we want to find joy in all of our holidays, and while we want to find joy in all of our gatherings, Sukkot is a special time to do it. It is Zman Simchatenu. And because it's no fun to rejoice alone, we fill our sukkah and our home with the warmth and glow that only guests can bring. Shabbat Shalom. Chag Sameach.